Arab prince insulted a black waitress seconds later. She replied in flawless Arabic and stunned him. It was a busy evening at a luxury restaurant in downtown Dubai, filled with wealthy guests wearing gold watches and designer suits. Among them sat Prince Khalid al-Rashid, an arrogant young royal known for his entitlement and disdain toward ordinary people. That night, a calm and humble black waitress named Maya was assigned to serve his table. She moved with quiet grace and confidence, her uniform perfectly pressed, her voice soft yet professional. But the prince barely acknowledged her presence, treating her as though she were invisible. When she leaned forward to pour his tea, her hand brushed his by accident. Khalid smirked, muttered something in Arabic that made his friends laugh, a cruel remark about her dark skin. They didn't realize Maya understood every word. Her heart tightened, but she stayed composed, simply bowing her head and walking away without a trace of anger. Inside, though, she felt the sting of disrespect. In the kitchen, one of her co-workers noticed her tense expression and asked if she was all right. Maya smiled faintly and replied, "I'm fine." She had learned long ago to control her emotions. Born and raised in Senegal, Maya had studied linguistics and could speak 5 languages fluently, including Arabic. She had come to Dubai chasing opportunity, not confrontation. But the sting of humiliation sat heavy in her chest as she watched the prince's table continue to laugh, mocking her behind her back. Khalid leaned in, bragging about his royal status, making jokes about people like her serving those of higher blood. His friends found it amusing, until Maya returned to the table with their dessert tray. Her steps were measured, her expression calm, her pride intact. She set the tray down gracefully and looked directly at Prince Khalid. The laughter around the table faded as Maya spoke, in flawless, elegant Arabic. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of quiet strength. "Your Highness," she said, "true nobility is not defined by wealth or title, but by how one treats those who serve them." The words struck him like thunder. The entire table fell silent. She continued, "I understood every word you said earlier. I chose silence then because dignity does not need to shout. It speaks when it must." For a long moment, the prince could only stare, his arrogance melting into embarrassment. The room seemed to stop moving, the background music fading into nothing. Then, something unexpected happened. The prince slowly rose from his chair, his eyes filled with regret. Switching to English, he said softly, "I owe you an apology." His voice trembled slightly, genuine this time. Maya nodded with a faint smile and replied, "Apology accepted, Your Highness." She turned and walked away with the same quiet grace she had entered with. Later that night, the prince left an enormous tip and requested to meet her privately, offering to fund her dream project, a language school for African children. In that moment, the arrogant prince had been humbled, not by power or wealth, but by the unshakable dignity of a woman who knew her worth. As Maya walked back into the kitchen, her heart was pounding, though her face showed nothing but calm professionalism. One of her co-workers noticed the tension in her eyes and quietly asked if she was all right. She gave a faint smile and replied, "I'm fine," even though deep inside she was anything but. Born and raised in Senegal, Maya had grown up in a family that valued education and dignity above all else. Her father had been a teacher, her mother a translator, and from a young age she had fallen in love with languages. Arabic was one of them, a language she mastered with discipline and respect long before moving to Dubai in search of opportunity. She had promised herself that no matter where life took her, she would never let anger dictate her actions. So, despite the sting of the prince's cruel remark, she focused on steadying her breath and doing her job with grace. Meanwhile, at the prince's table, laughter continued to echo through the restaurant. Prince Khalid leaned back in his chair, smirking as he spoke to his friends about the waitress who didn't know her place. His words dripped with arrogance, mocking Maya's accent, her hair, and even her presence in such a high-end establishment. The others laughed, following his lead, feeding his ego. But not everyone joined in. One of the waiters serving nearby leaned closer to the prince and said quietly, "Your Highness, that woman you're mocking is one of our best." She's fluent in 5 languages, including Arabic, French, and English. She's highly educated." The prince raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Fluent?" He scoffed. "In what? Cleaning tables?" His friends burst into another round of laughter, and the sound was sharp enough to draw glances from nearby diners. But none of them realized that Maya had just stepped out of the kitchen again, carrying a silver dessert tray. Her posture was perfect, her eyes calm, and not a hint of bitterness touched her face. She could hear fragments of their mockery as she approached, yet she said nothing. When she reached the table, she placed the dessert in front of the prince with careful precision, her hands steady as glass. Then, as she straightened up, she met his gaze directly. For a brief moment their eyes locked, his filled with superiority, hers with quiet intelligence. What he didn't know was that the woman he thought beneath him understood every single word that had just left his mouth. Maya felt a rush of strength build inside her, a sense of power that came not from anger, but from restraint. She knew the right moment would come, not to humiliate, but to teach. The restaurant lights shimmered on the polished table, the laughter died down, and as the prince reached for his dessert, Maya's calm presence lingered longer than his arrogance could handle. Something inside her told her that before the night was over, the prince would learn what true grace really meant. Maya set the dessert plate down before the prince with a soft clink that echoed louder than any voice in the room. She stood straight, her eyes calm but firm, and for the first time that evening she looked directly into the prince's face. The room still hummed with laughter from his friends, but something about her quiet stare made their amusement falter. Then, in a voice steady as silk, Maya began to speak, in flawless, refined Arabic. The words flowed from her lips like poetry, each one sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. "Your Highness," she said, her tone neither bitter nor afraid, "where I come from, we believe nobility is not proven by gold, nor by the name you inherit, but by the way you treat the hands that serve you." The laughter around the table stopped instantly. The prince blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. The sound of her voice, the purity of her pronunciation was impossible to ignore. It wasn't the Arabic of a foreigner, it was elegant, deep, and formal, the kind spoken in royal courts and holy texts. His smug smile faded as the meaning of her words sank in. The restaurant grew quieter, as though even the chandeliers leaned closer to listen. Maya continued, her eyes never leaving his. "I understood everything you said earlier," she went on, her voice still low but unwavering. "But I chose not to respond, because dignity doesn't shout. It speaks when the moment demands." There was no anger in her tone, only a calm strength that made her words heavier than any insult could. Every person at that table now looked at her differently, some in awe, others in shame. The prince, once so sure of his superiority, found himself unable to speak. His friends, who had been laughing only moments ago, now sat frozen, their gazes darting between him and Maya, unsure what to do. In that silence, the truth of her words hung in the air like incense, soft, undeniable, and impossible to escape. The music, playing faintly in the background, seemed to fade completely. The waiters in the distance had stopped moving, sensing something powerful was happening. Maya stood there, poised and composed, not seeking attention, not trying to humiliate anyone, only reclaiming her respect in the most graceful way possible. The prince finally lowered his eyes, shame washing over his face. He had never been spoken to like that before, especially not by someone he had dismissed so carelessly. For the first time in his life, he realized that true power had nothing to do with birth or wealth. It came from self-respect. As Maya gave a polite bow and turned to leave, no one dared to stop her. The silence that followed her was louder than any apology could ever be. In that single moment, she had reminded an entire room of what real royalty looked like, not in the glitter of crowns, but in the grace of character. For a long, breathless moment, no one in the restaurant spoke. The prince sat frozen, his pride collapsing under the weight of Maya's calm dignity. The silence that followed was deafening, cutting through the music, through the chatter, through the echo of his own arrogance. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the scene they had laughed at had turned into something unforgettable. Finally, Prince Khalid pushed his chair back and slowly stood up. The arrogance that once filled his eyes was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar: remorse. His voice, when it came, was softer than anyone had ever heard it. Switching to English, he said, "I owe you an apology." The words seemed to shock even his own entourage. A royal prince apologizing publicly to a waitress? No one had ever seen it happen before. But Maya only smiled gently, her poise unbroken. "Apology accepted, Your Highness," she said quietly, her tone graceful and sincere. Then she added, "Enjoy your evening," before turning away with the same quiet strength she had shown all night. As she walked back toward the kitchen, the restaurant seemed to breathe again. Guests whispered to one another, some admiring her courage, others moved by the way she handled herself with such dignity. The staff, who had seen many rude customers before, looked at Maya as if she had done something heroic. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand attention, yet she had earned respect from everyone in that room, including the man who thought he was above her. Prince Khalid stood still, his gaze following her. His pride had taken a deep hit, but so had his perspective. For the first time, he saw the kind of strength that couldn't be bought with money or born from royalty. It was the strength of restraint, of education, of self-respect. Later that night, as the restaurant closed and the lights dimmed, the prince quietly called for the manager. He asked for Maya's full name and her background, listening as he learned about her dream of opening a language school for underprivileged children back in Senegal. Without hesitation, he pulled out a pen and signed a personal check large enough to make her dream possible. "Make sure she receives this anonymously," he said, not out of guilt but genuine respect. For once, his gesture came from his heart, not his ego. The next day, when Maya was told about the prince's donation, she was stunned. She didn't boast or celebrate. She simply smiled, grateful that something good had come from something cruel. She realized she hadn't just stood up for herself, she had changed someone else's heart in the process. And as she looked out at the sunrise over Dubai, she whispered softly to herself, "Dignity always wins." That night became a story told by the staff for years, a reminder that true power doesn't roar. Sometimes it speaks softly and still shakes the world.